This area here is the area that I call the food forest, and it's a lot like a permaculture food forest, but not exactly. What I originally did was I cut 3 big swales. This was one of them here, and it was cut about 800 millimeters deep, and the dirt was piled up on the side. And then I threw in lots of branches, like I had to cut down some trees here to create this area, and all the branches from the trees went into the swales, and then I dumped cow poo and other organic matter on top. And the idea is that this acts as a nutrient sink. So the nutrients seep down the hill from this spot. However, what I found was that my soil here is a bit too porous for swales to be very useful. So what I've done is I've converted the swales into terraces. There was originally 3 swales, and now there's about 7 terraces. So the logs that come out of a few trees that came out of this area, they've been used to create terraces. So if we have a look down here, we can see the log that's part of the terrace, and I put logs and created terraces in between the swales, because on soil which is porous, it seems that you don't really need this thing that catches water and holds it so that it gets time to soak in. It seems that in this sort of soil, terraces are sufficient. That holds the water long enough for it to soak in, and you don't need to dedicate whole areas to swales and things like that, just terracing. So there's the logs, and I've also, if we keep walking along here, I'll point out things as we go. I've planted loads of legumes. That's lucerne. This is burgundy bean. And there's loads of other things that have been thrown in here as well. Basically, any legume that I could get a hold of, I've thrown in here, and some of them do well and some of them don't. But if you have a look in here, you'll see that I've put, there's some rocks here leaning up against the logs, and some more short lengths of log leading up against the log. They're intended to provide homes for little animals. So this food forest is not just about food for people, it's also about food and living space and protection for all life, really. And
life supports life as well, no? Like this insects.
Yes, because they all help each other in one way or another. Even if it's not obvious, I just have the possibility of, the more things that live here, the better. And whether it's plants or animals or birds, even if I don't understand the relationships that go on between them, that ultimately they all support each other in various ways. So I've planted leguminous trees here. These are called Targasasti, and they're quite suitable for this area because they're a leguminous fodder tree that is drought tolerant, it's frost tolerant, and so it's supporting the whole environment. Also, the shade from it protects things around it from frost, to some extent anyway. And I use this in a lot of ways because in a permaculture food forest, they often put chickens and things like that in there for the poo to feed the soil. But I'm doing a different approach here where I'm doing it with wild animals. This Targasasti here is intended to, as well as all those things, feed the wallabies, the wild animals that normally eat grass most of the year, but in winter when the frost gets pretty bad, the grass all dies off and the wallabies get pretty hungry, and so they start eating everything. And if I can just give them some food during those few months of winter when the frost is bad, they'll be less eating the little natives that are coming up in the forest. Because I do notice that at that time of year they do tend to hammer the little natives that are coming up through the forest. So this is going to be both, eventually when everything grows more, this will provide shade for the wallabies to sit under in summer. It'll provide food for them in winter, and the wallabies will actually be feeding the soil with their poo. So in permaculture they have this concept called cut and drop, where they grow what they call green manures, things that are legumes, and they are capable of fertilising the soil, but mostly that happens from them cutting them all down and letting them sit on the ground as mulch. My approach to this is to let the wild animals do it for me. I'll let the wild animals eat the legumes and poo and leave their poo behind. So
nothing gets wasted.
Nothing gets wasted, and the wild animals are doing the work for me. I don't need to do the cut and drop. The wallabies do that for me, and what they're dropping is actually better than what they're eating, because they're pre-digesting it and concentrating it. So in here I've got loads of things planted. This is just sugarcane coming up. There's Australian natives, that's a she oak. Golden grevillea. There's lots of weeds. Weeds are particularly interesting. This weed here, 2 summers ago, it covered an entire section of the upper section of this food forest, and it grew like this high, and it was like a jungle. I had to get through it like this. It was so thick, but I just let it go, and then it's an annual, so it died off during winter. And the funny thing is that the next summer, I got a totally different weed dominating. And a lot of people would tend to think that, oh, you can't let these weeds do their thing because they'll go to seed and they'll just take over. Well, it seems like these things did their thing one year, and then they've backed off. And the next year I had a different weed do it. And this year, the weeds are around, all the same weeds are still here, but they're not dominating like they were previously. It's like they do their thing, and that's it. And in the process, especially the annual weeds are great because they just die and fall on the ground, and they're creating mulch. It's all going back into the soil. So it's all good stuff. And through here, you can see it's not manicured at all. It's all left to go natural, so it's minimum work. There's just Debosia mulch on the ground here, and there was cow poo and stuff put underneath it. I'll talk more about Debosia and various mulches in a later talk. But I tend to just let things grow. I plant lots of natives that aren't going to grow to humongous sizes, and I'm also planting a few fruit and nut trees in here and just seeing how they go. And some things do better than others. It's all a learning experience. Maybe we'll go for a little bit of a walk around here and I'll just point out a few things. So as part of my food forest, I'm trying to get things to grow that would not normally grow here. That's why I've created this food forest, so that things can help each other. But in the interim stage, while it's still fairly small, I'm having to give things a little bit more help. You'll see these guards here. They're basically supports for a frost cloth. I wrap around those guards in winter to help the frost intolerant plants that are in there get through winter until the point where they either get big enough to be frost tolerant, because often small plants are less frost tolerant than big ones, or the things around them grow big enough to give them some shade from the frost. Because I've discovered that you get a lot less frost in the shade area under a tree than you do out in the open. Frost seems to be related to how much sky any area is exposed to. So the more sky a plant can see, the more it's likely to get frost on it. And here, frost can go down to -6, -5 is very common, and I've even had it as low as -8. So this part of the food forest here, there's a reasonable density of food trees. That's a finger lime. This is an olive. That's a mulberry. That's a lime. And there's a few other things in here. There's also some
What is this one?
native food plants. This is a bottle brush, an Australian native. There's lots of natives in here. Like this is a native ground cover that's actually edible. And there's lots of Targasasti that are still growing, more Targasasti, natives, and in some places it gets really overgrown, and we'll go up and show you a little bit more overgrown area now. So this is the sort of thing that I'm aiming for, because things are getting so lush here that they're starting to protect each other. We've got Targasasti providing a little bit of shade and also a bit of frost protection. This is a Malabar chestnut, which is a frost sensitive species, but it's been here for a couple of years now and it's getting through the winter all right. There's lots of natives that are planted around the place, as well as there's things hidden in here that you don't see, and you could walk around here and it just looks like a mess, but there's lots of edible things here spread in amongst it, as well as the grasses and the weeds and all that sort of stuff. This is the most recent section that's been done of the food forest, and there was a bit of a failure I had with this area, because I brought in a truckload of cow poo from a feedlot, and I mixed it in with some mulch I got from the dump. I'll talk about mulches at a later date. And I put it all in here and I planted things in it, and they didn't do very well. And I thought, what's going on? So it occurred to me to test the pH, and I found that the pH of the cow poo, it was pH 9, and which is really alkaline, and that's why things weren't going very well. So I ended up trying to find ways to bring the pH back to a bit more back to normal. So I ended up buying some sulfur and spreading sulfur over the area, because that'll bring the pH more acidic. And you can see that it's starting to work better now, that things are growing better. And we go down through the Debosia here, and if we look at the soil underneath, we've got some pretty good soil under there now. So it's finally starting to do its thing. The sulfur it's been sitting here for probably 18 months or 2 years now without me worrying too much about it. And I think patience is pretty important. Sometimes you do these sort of things and you just have to sit back and wait. And So more things will get planted in here in the near future.
What does the soil look like when it's too alkaline?
Just stuff doesn't grow in it. It's not very supportive of life. It just doesn't look as lush as what perhaps this is beginning to look now. You might get a couple of weeds which are tolerant of it, but most things don't grow in it very well.